Thanks so much for inviting me to speak at this forum. My name's Paddy Dillon, and I'm one of the founders of the Theatre Green Book. And what I want to do in this talk is really answer four questions. Firstly, why do the arts matter? Why is it important that the arts and the performing arts themselves become sustainable? Secondly, what are the key principles that we've learned about making change? Has the Theatre Green Book really created change globally? And finally, what's in the Theatre Green Book? What are theatre makers around the world doing to make the performing arts more sustainable? But let's start with that first question, because we've all, in whatever continent we live, we're facing so many big crises and challenges and threats at the moment. Do we really need to spend our time making the performing arts sustainable as well? Well, there are a number of answers to that question. The first, of course, is that even though we're so busy making work, trying to make the best theatre, the best performances that we can, we know that the climate crisis is perhaps the most urgent, the most threatening, the most frightening crisis that humanity has ever faced. And we know that we have to address it quickly. But why do the arts matter? We know that the performing arts is a small sector. Surely the real problem lies in aviation and transport and industry and manufacture. And I think to that there are a number of different answers. First, that we have an ability to tell stories about the world, to engage audiences, to change the conversations within society. And if we want to do that, then we must ourselves become sustainable. The climate crisis affects everyone, and everyone needs to change. If we want to speak about climate, we need the voice itself, the voice of theatre and the performing arts, to become sustainable. And there's a third reason as well. As I hope I'll show you during this talk, we have a success story in theatre. We are making change. And that means that we can show others that change is possible and remove some of the fear around the climate emergency. So, what are the key principles for change? The Theatre Green Book began 4 years ago now, during the pandemic and the lockdown that it caused. And we've learned a lot in those 4 years about what the real priorities are, how it is that we can take the theatre and performing arts sector and create change within them. The first thing we learned is that we have to do this together. It makes no sense for every theatre in the world to research the climate emergency, to develop its own rules, its own standards, its own priorities for climate action. We will only address the climate emergency if we address it together and work together collectively. Now, that's something which in every country the performing arts does. We know each other, we have networks, we know how to work collaboratively, and that too is how we're going to address the climate crisis. The second principle we discovered is that the guidance that we set out to create in the Theatre Green Book has to be practical. We are theatre makers, not scientists or climate engineers. If somebody says we need to reduce our carbon, most of us don't really know what that means for us. And it's only by bringing together all of the many skills that go into theatre making, of set building, of costumes, of technical theatre, of running theatre buildings, only by bringing those together and putting them together with sustainability experts that we can really work out what it is we need to do to make theatre sustainable. The third principle that we discovered as we created the Theatre Green Book is that our approach has to be methodical. There are so many different things involved in sustainability, and we need to know where to start. And so we have divided the challenge into three. We have to make our productions as sustainable as possible. We have to run our operations sustainably, travel, transport, digital, waste, catering. And we need to make our theatre buildings sustainable as well. What do we need to do? In our productions, we need to change from a world in which we're taking materials, putting them on stage and throwing them away, to a circular economy for theatre based on reuse and recycling. In our operations, we need to reduce how much we use, source it sustainably, reuse and recycle everything we can. And in our buildings, we need to make sure they're insulated, that we have efficient systems, that we generate renewable energy and support biodiversity. The fourth, the last principle that we discovered for making change is that if together we're going to make the performing arts sustainable, we need guidance which is measurable. And so in the Theatre Green Book, across those three areas of productions, operations and buildings, we've set standards. A basic standard to begin with, an intermediate standard to progress to, and an advanced standard which is net zero theatre. We can't change overnight. This is a transition which will take time, and these standards will give a roadmap together to reach climate neutral theatre. So the next question, of course, is it working? The Theatre Green Book has been in existence for 3 or 4 years. Has it created change globally? And the answer to that is yes. Across Europe, we now have networks of Theatre Green Book users. In most of the countries in Europe, we have the Theatre Green Book being discussed or translated or developed across the world. And that means that there are theatres and theatre makers everywhere who have a common language, who can share what they've learned and work together to apply the best possible principles of sustainable theatre. We have many translations now, including into Korean. We have networks in Germany. We have networks in Denmark. We have meetings happening in countries the whole time. This one was in Amsterdam, in Holland, to begin networks, to enable theatre makers to adapt the principles of the Theatre Green Book to suit their own practice, because of course we all work in slightly different ways, but still to talk to each other, to share standards, to share principles, to share approaches, and a common language that will enable us to work together. One of the most important of those networks is the European Theatre Convention, the biggest theatre network in Europe, with theatres across every country in Europe. With them, we've been working to make a Theatre Green Book for their network. And we've done a really interesting thing. We took 9 theatres in different countries of Europe, speaking different languages, working in different ways. And we've worked together with them to develop the newest version of the Theatre Green Book. And once those 9 theatres have reached basic standard, once they've learned the principles, once they've developed the ideas for making sustainable theatre, they will be able to share it with the rest of the network. And that means that using the steps of the Theatre Green Book, from basic to intermediate to advanced, we're able to set out a timeline. We've already made the new version of the Theatre Green Book, and we believe that we can make theatre in Europe sustainable, net zero, by the end of 2030. Now, that's a timeline which has been agreed by the European Commission. It's been adopted by the European Theatre Convention. It's been adopted by theatres and communities of theatres across Europe. It would be really exciting if theatre in Korea could do the same. If, working as a network, you could join that global conversation, bring your expertise to help other theatres around the world, and begin a path that would take Korean theatre to net zero by the end of 2030. In the UK, we've just brought out a second edition of the Theatre Green Book a month ago. We developed that, just as we did in the rest of Europe, by bringing together a group of 12 theatres. And these are the major theatres of the United Kingdom: the National Theatre, Royal Opera and Ballet, the Royal Shakespeare Company. These are our biggest, our most important theatres, as well too as some small-scale theatres, because if we're to have a common language, it must work for everybody, and everybody must be together in using it. So we have small-scale theatres as well, to give everyone a shared approach on the journey to net zero. All of those theatres on the screen have now reached the basic level of the Theatre Green Book. What does that mean? Does it mean they are perfectly sustainable, that they're net zero theatres? No, not yet. As I said before, this is a transition, not an immediate change, but they are all working in ways which are meaningfully sustainable, which are significantly better than they were before. And that applies not only to the productions that they make, but to the way they run their operations as well, their digital, their catering, their travel and transport, their waste. And it applies to their buildings, to make sure that those theatres and that the infrastructure of the performing arts across the UK is starting to be fit for purpose in the context of the climate emergency. So what's in the Theatre Green Book? What is this method which is creating change in global theatre, which is starting to make our sector, the performing arts, sustainable? Well, the second edition of the Theatre Green Book has come out in the UK a month ago. We launched the European Theatre Convention Green Book a few weeks ago, and there are new editions of the Theatre Green Book coming out in countries across the world in the course of this summer. And the Theatre Green Book starts with a very simple statement of the challenge we face and why it is that we must become environmentally sustainable. It gives a really simple statement of what the Theatre Green Book is. It gives us a framework for planning sustainability. It gives us best practice guidance for every area. It sets 3 standards on the path to net zero. And it gives us a measurement system to measure our progress. Why should theatre makers trust the Theatre Green Book? How can they be sure that the guidance and the method it contains really is the right way to sustainable theatre? It's because it's based on practical expertise from theatre makers. When we wrote the Theatre Green Book, we brought together theatre makers of all sorts: directors, designers, set builders, people who run costumes, people in charge of buildings or catering, people who run box office or marketing. We brought them all together, from large theatres, from small touring companies. We brought them together so that we could be sure that all the guidance in the Theatre Green Book was really practical. It was things that we as a sector know to be possible, so that we could really understand the processes and systems of making a show. What change could I make if I'm a director? What change could I make if I run a costume department? What do I need other people to do differently if together, working collaboratively, we're going to produce a more sustainable outcome? All of that knowledge has gone into the Theatre Green Book and enables us as theatre makers to know that it gives us a realistic path. But it's also based on reliable methodology from environmental sustainability experts. We had experts as part of the process able to work out where the real impacts lie, so that we could make those our priorities, so that we could know what it is we need to change if we want to make theatre sustainable. And the Theatre Green Book will support work of any kind in the performing arts: theatre, dance, opera. Theatre makers, dance makers, and opera makers were all part of the team who created the Theatre Green Book. We talk a lot in the Theatre Green Book about the challenge of how we start, because we know now from talking to so many theatres in so many different countries that that can be the real challenge. How do we start? Where do we begin? Sustainability covers so many different things: our productions, technical theatre, touring, travel, deliveries, transport, the building, where our food comes from. It covers so many things that starting can be really difficult. So we have a first stage, we call it preliminary, which is all about arranging your organisation, whether it's large or small, to become sustainable, making sure you have a green committee, an action plan, a timeline plan, a communications plan to make sure that your staff, your partners, your artists are all sharing the same vision, and a commitment to make sure that everyone is behind this urgent and necessary journey towards sustainability. And we set out what that journey is going to look like, the journey from basic to intermediate to advanced, running across our productions, our operations and buildings, so that we can take the fear away. We're no longer looking for what the solutions are. We know what the solutions are. The task now, the urgent task for people in theatre across the world, is to begin that journey and to carry it out with commitment and integrity and energy and creativity to bring our sector to sustainable theatre by the end of 2030. Of course, on that journey, we need to measure our progress, and the Theatre Green Book offers you a way to do that. So in each country now, we'll be allowing theatres to certify their own progress from that preliminary commitment through basic, intermediate, advanced. And in the UK, in other countries, in the European Theatre Convention, theatres who reach that standard will be able to share with their audiences, with their funders, with their staff and partners, the standard that they've reached. And everyone can know what that means, what they're doing differently, how they are working in ways that don't harm the planet. The Theatre Green Book gives us the tools we need for measuring outcomes, measuring not only what we're doing differently, and of course that's the most important thing, which standard we've reached, but also our circularity. How much are we reusing and recycling in our productions and in the rest of our work? And what are the key carbon impacts that we're having in kilograms of CO2 equivalent in our productions, in our operations, and in our buildings? Now, to do all of that, of course, we need the right tools. And with the Theatre Green Book, we've made the tools that theatre makers need to carry out that journey effectively. In each area, we've created pages of detailed guidance going into the detail of set building or of production or design, going into the detail of touring, going into the detail of carrying out transformations to buildings. And you'll also find, and everything in the Theatre Green Book is free to use online, we've also created support tools we need for each area. A production calculator, it's an Excel spreadsheet, easy to use, which will enable people to assess each show and to work out what percentage of the material on stage is reused or recycled, because that, as I said at the start of this talk, is the real principle of sustainable production. Can we move to a theatre economy where we're reusing and recycling far more and using far less new materials that are then thrown away? Our calculator allows you to work that out. To achieve a basic show, 50% of everything on stage needs to be reused or recycled, and 65% needs to be reused or recycled again after the show. There are theatres across the world which are now regularly achieving that standard and making shows which are meaningfully more sustainable. We've made a tracker for operations that covers your organisation, paper and digital, food, drink and retail, managing the building, managing waste and travel, and your contracts with third parties. It's easy to use and it gives an immediate readout to enable you to keep track of the 110 things that you need to do to become more sustainable. And finally, in order to help us plan for making our buildings more sustainable, we've made a building survey tool that will enable any theatre to carry out an initial assessment of its building and work out what you need to do to make it more sustainable. And we've divided those actions into easy wins, things that won't cost very much, but will still have an impact on your energy use, maintenance projects that will cost a little bit more and you can do them every year, for example, changing lights to LED, and capital projects, the big expensive changes, insulation, or replacing boilers with heat pumps, which will bring your building closer and closer to net zero. Using those tools, theatres across the world are on the journey to sustainability. They've made real progress. In the United Kingdom now, nearly all subsidised theatres are using the Theatre Green Book. Most of our major theatres are already at basic standard, and that's after only 2 or 3 years of using it. In countries across the rest of Europe and beyond, theatres are using the Theatre Green Book and showing that the challenge of making our sector sustainable is not impossible. It's not one in which we are doomed to fail. It's easy to be depressed about the climate emergency, but in theatre and the performing arts now, we have a success story. We have proved that the journey is possible, that we can carry it out with creativity, with integrity and resource, and that in doing so, we don't need to compromise our work. We can still make important, ambitious shows within the parameters of the climate emergency. All of these images come from shows that have reached Theatre Green Book standards. In other words, using the right tools, using a common language that can include and involve theatre makers around the world. We have begun this journey and we have learned how to make theatre without harming the planet we live in. Thanks very much indeed. Don't be afraid of sustainability. Collaborate and work together, and remember that this is above all a creative challenge. Thanks so much for inviting me to the forum, and we really wish you all the best in this journey. Thanks so much.